One of the major outcomes of the Reformations, plural, not singular, as I discussed in the previous video, is religious war. A major fallout from the Reformation was that it brought more than 100 years of religious war and violence in Europe, and you had a hugely increased chance of being killed for your religious beliefs. These wars all merged religious and political issues, which makes sense when you think about how Ulrich Zwingli, Martin Luther, and John Calvin um, understood how merging politics and religion was essential to ensuring the survival of their reforms. So this is a map of Europe about the year 1560. So that's, after the initial wave of the likes of Luther and Calvin and Zwingli. And then I'm going to show you at the end of the next video, Europe by the end of this 100-year period of religious warfare. And it looks very, very different. So let's have a look at the religious wars in France. We could look at Germany or Switzerland, but you should have a look in your textbook for more information on that. We're going to look at France because we were case studying France last week, so we can pick up where we left off last week. And then we're, in the next video of my videos, we're going to look at the relationship between England and Spain, and that's basically the Henry VIII stuff. So last week we were talking about the Renaissance, and we're picking up with some of the same characters actually from the Renaissance. King Francis I of France, who we did look at last week, he was the one who really got the French Renaissance court going with the artists and all the rest. He did a deal with the Pope where he agreed to recognize papal supremacy over any church council in exchange for the right to appoint all of the French bishops and abbots. So this hugely increased the number of offices that the French king could sell or give to his favorites as rewards. So this is an example of corruption that people were opposed to. In particular, Calvin. Calvin was French, Jean Calvin. He wrote in French. He went and moved to Geneva, which is marked on the map here to the right of France. It's not that far away from France. And it is French-speaking Switzerland, whereas Zwingli was in German-speaking Switzerland. So his reforms, therefore, did have impact on France, which we tend to think of as an overwhelmingly Catholic country, and that's kind of as a result of these religious wars that stemmed after the Reformation. Now, French Calvinist Protestants have a special name, though, that is Huguenots. Good one to remember, a hint, hint. So after the flood tide, most of them converted to Calvinism in the 1560s. So the movement, probably maybe 10% of French people had converted to Calvinism. And that's roughly about 1.8 million, just shy of 2 million of the total population of France. So at first, the strength was in small merchant and artisan communities, quite urban, but it actually attracted a lot of notable people, including the nobility and converts from the Catholic clergy as well. So before we get to the period of 1562, which is the first civil war in France over religious issues, we estimate that about 1/3 of the nobility of France had either converted or openly supported the Huguenot movement. So this means that in terms of the people who had power in France, sort of disproportionate sympathy for reforming Protestants, particularly Calvinism. So while 10% you might not say is very much of the population, they kind of punch above their weights in terms of the political clout that they've got. So this means that there's a lot of tension erupts in France over religious issues. Both sides, both Huguenot and Catholic sides, were often very violent. There was lots in the 1560s of mob violence when religious statues would be pulled down, windows would be smashed, paintings would be destroyed. Mobs would defend, mobs would attack, and it was a period of murders and assassinations as well, which led to the 1560s, where it transitioned from being sort of local epidemic violence to being open warfare. So throughout the 1560s, there were riots and massacres and local revolts, and there were different battles as well through official wars to suppress this. So France was viewed as being the battlefield for the European contest of Reformation and Catholic Reformation ideals. Now, in general, the French kings and queens and the monarchy supported the Catholics, but they also arranged truces. One of these came in 1572. In 1572, the Protestant prince, Henry of Navarre, was married to the king's sister, who was called Marguerite, and this looked to be the start of a more permanent truce. Now, the king's mother at this time was our friend Catherine de' Medici from last week. Her husband, Henri, has long been dead by this point, and in fact, a number of her sons have ruled France. Her son Francis, who was married to Mary, Queen of Scots, inherited the throne after his father died, but he died prematurely. So, because her son, who is now king, is very young, she acts as regent for the monarchy in France. So she had been regent. She had responsibility for overseeing the religious response to the Calvinists and the violence that was occurring across France between Calvinists and Catholics. She, by 1572, has been under a lot of criticism for how badly she has handled the Huguenots. As a response, they're looking for a more permanent truce by marrying Henry of Navarre, who is one of the leading Protestants, to the king's sister. But a few days later, on the 24th of August, which is St. Bartholomew's Day, most of the prominent Protestant wedding guests were assassinated by order of the Royal Council, and this led to thousands of Protestants being slaughtered in mob violence. This mob violence spread even further, and more were killed in the direction of town authorities, and this became known as the St. Bartholomew's Day Massacre. Although the initiative and the atrocity was not the king's or Queen Catherine's, the crown still accepted responsibility for what happened, and they claimed that the killing had been necessary to anticipate a Protestant plot. A lot of Huguenots fled, went into exile as a result of the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre, but others stayed, and this renewed warfare between Catholic and Protestant for another 15 years in France. This included an assassination, including of the king himself. King Henry III was stabbed to death, and this meant that the next nearest relative to inherit the monarchy was the aforementioned Henry of Navarre, the Protestant. So Henry of Navarre became King Henry IV of France in 1584. Now, King Henry IV, as a Protestant, probably understood the tensions between Protestant and Catholic much better. So to calm things down, he declared Catholicism the official religion of France. And a few years later, he even agreed to convert to Catholicism to keep the peace. Despite suspicion of this, the truce was officially confirmed in 1598 in the Edict of Nantes. In the Edict of Nantes, Catholicism was indeed made the official religion, but it also gave Huguenots the right to live and worship freely and the right to maintain about 150 fortified towns. So they were allowed to practice their religious beliefs and allowed to maintain a way of defending themselves. So the Edict of Nantes actually did bring about religious peace in France after several decades of warfare, up until 1685. In 1685, it was revoked. That's outside of our time period. If you want to learn more about it, there's EH103, Modern European Civilization with Dr. Cameron, and that led to renewed hostilities between Huguenots and Catholics in France. So the religious wars came to an end because Henry of Navarre becoming King Henry IV, but also people were exhausted after decades of warfare, and the crown was pretty scared of revolution from below, anarchy from below. The governing classes ultimately set aside their religious differences and looked in common to the crown as the force that could restore order. At the same time, the lower orders appealed to the king to end the wars and protect them. So this was also a movement then in increasing the absolutism of the French monarchy, which again, if you want to know more about and how it gets to the French Revolution, EH103 is your class. I'm going to end the video on France here as a case study of religious warfare in continental Europe, and then the next video is going to talk about England.